Our next panel, Transdisciplinary Science, Are We There Yet?, will turn the spotlight on how science produces knowledge and evidence to advise governments and public decision-making. Paulsen, Director of the Network for Transdisciplinary Research at the Swiss Academies of Arts and Sciences, will be moderating the panel. The speakers are Siri, Senior Science Lead for Cities, Urbanization and Health at Wellcome Trust's Our Planet, Our Health program, Ana Maria Hernandez Salgar, Chair of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Service, Naoko Ishii, Director of the Center for Global Commons at the University of Tokyo, Nebjosa Nakicenovic, Deputy Chair of the European Commission Group of Chief Scientific Advisors. Please take it away, Ms. Paulsen.
So thank you very much, and a very warm welcome from Switzerland. I'm in Bern at the moment, and it's late afternoon. So have a nice day in all these different time zones. It is a great honor for me to chair this distinguished panel on transdisciplinary sciences and its relevance for policy advice. My name is Paulsen. I'm the head of the Network for Transdisciplinary Research of the Swiss Academies of Arts and Sciences. And we are working for years now to renew the relationship between sciences and society, to question the current culture of sciences and the recognition of scientific work. We believe that different scientific approaches are needed to depending on the questions to be answered, and that in addition to disciplinary excellence, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary sciences should receive equal recognition. To this end, both the training offered and the career opportunities need to be adapted. For example, TDNet has created the world's first massive open online course for 3D research. But before we start with our discussion, I ask the audience to post comments or questions to the panel. And please start always with a C for comment or a Q for question so that we can answer it more easily. If the question is addressed to someone specific on the panel, please add also the name, then I can ask this person to answer to it. And I'm sure that INGSA Association will be happy to have further input for the follow-up from these panels and all these sessions that are organized. But I don't want to use valuable speaking time from our panelists, and who can introduce themselves better than they themselves. And they can also add a few insights from the work, the daily work and questions they are dealing with. So perhaps, Ana Maria, you could introduce yourself briefly and present the mission of the science policy interface you are working for. Perhaps you may also end with some examples or occasions you encounter transdisciplinarity in science and policy advice, and in what form?
Yes, so, thank you. Thank you very much, Therese. And I'm very happy to be here with all of you. Thanks to INGSA and the City of Montreal to host this fantastic conference and this fantastic panel with my colleague panelists today. Well, as I am Ana Maria Hernandez, Chair of the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And as maybe you will know, IPBES since 2012 started to work as an independent intergovernmental organization which provides science knowledge on biodiversity to support better decision making, and has been focused on 4 pillars. The first one is determining knowledge needs. Also, we conduct assessments with existing information according to the priorities that are given by our plenary. Also, we try to build capacities for decision makers, experts, and stakeholders that are within our community. And finally, we try to create spaces for understanding tools and methodologies that support policy decisions. In doing so, IPBES has produced in total 8 major assessments, including thematic and methodological assessments, as well as regional assessment, and one that you know very well, our global assessment. And also we produced a number of workshop reports, including coming from indigenous and local knowledge, also one report on biodiversity, loss and pandemic risk, and the last one that we co-sponsored with IPCC on climate change and biodiversity. And well, to build all these, we not only have 137 member states that are involved, but also we work together with more than 1,500 experts around the globe from different disciplines of knowledge, including natural, social, human, economic, and political sciences, and also experts of indigenous peoples and local communities that have contributed with diverse knowledge systems to our process. So together from very different perspectives, we are assessing the state of the biodiversity and the contributions of nature to people, but also we are presenting key messages for decision makers based on this information coming from these different and wide knowledge systems. So we catalyze science for people and nature based on transdisciplinarity. Thank you.
Thank you. So another perspective, Nakia, can you provide your profile and your insights, please?
Yes, thank you. First, let me say that I'm delighted to have the opportunity to participate in this session. As some of you have seen from the program, original Nicole Grobert, who is the chair of the group of 7 chief scientific advisors to the European Commission, intended to join this session, but unfortunately, this is no longer possible. So she has asked me to step in. Therefore, as you have asked me, a few words about my person. I was Deputy Director General of IASA, International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. This is a non-governmental and interdisciplinary research institute that works on some of the major global challenges like climate change, ecosystems, and demographic transitions. My other position was the Professor of Energy Economics at Vienna University of Technology. And now I'm emeritus at both of these institutions, but I'm also Director of the World in 2050, which is an initiative to provide scientific underpinning for the 2030 Agenda and the 17 SDGs. And I would say that both of these activities are deeply related to the inherently transdisciplinary, and both of these activities focus on the policy advice. Let me just say a few words about the group of advisors to the European Commission. The idea is that they provide policy with high quality, timely, and independent scientific advice on complex issues that require holistic, transdisciplinary, and I would like to amplify that, approaches. The group develops policy recommendations based on scientific evidence. And this is typically provided by the evidence review reports that are prepared by SAPEA. Now, SAPEA is a consortium of European academies and societies, and the acronym stands for Scientific Advice for Policy of the European Academies. And usually the groups, no, actually always the groups are transdisciplinary and take a holistic view on the problems. So the group of advisors, together with SAPEA and the Secretariat in the Commission, form the scientific advice mechanism of the European communities. Let me just close by making one announcement. I would like to invite all of you, all of the participants, to our interactive workshop next Tuesday on the 7th of September on science advice for energy policy, Who is afraid of epistemic diversity? You can find future information on INGSA conference website, and I believe also in the chat it will be posted. So thank you, I'll stop here.
Thank you. So perhaps Naoko, you can give your insights from Japan.
Sure. I'm very happy to be here. I'm inaugurating director for the Center for Global Commons, which is newly established about a year ago. And before that, I was actually the CEO of the GEF, Global Environment Facility, for 8 years. And indeed, we are working together with CBD, and we are working together with IASA and the NACI in particular, that because we are all the member of the Global Commons Alliance, and my mission, which I inherited from my GEF time, is to find the best mechanism to govern the global environmental commons. And for this mission, we need a kind of interdisciplinary academic research coming from natural science, but also together with social science. And because we would like to find a way that what is the best possible pathway to achieve the carbon neutrality, for instance, by 2050. That Naki mentioned the word in 2050, but it's not only just the energy, it's actually a very comprehensive planetary Earth system. And so the natural science, interdisciplinary natural science is extremely important, but then to translate this vision into action, the social science is also extremely important. So this interface of the natural and social science is needed to translate the vision. On top of that, when we advise the government or to talk to the business leaders, there is another important interdisciplinary interface that how that the real world, the people actually take those advice in their own action. So that is another important area which we may want to touch upon later. Thank you. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you. And Jose, your perspective is more of the funding side of science.
That's right. Thank you, Therese, and thanks to INGSA for including me on this interesting panel. It's really great to see INGSA taking up this important topic area. So I'm the Senior Science Lead for Cities, Urbanization, and Health for the Wellcome Trust's Our Planet, Our Health priority area. Wellcome is one of the world's leading funders of health research, and for the past 6 years, Wellcome's Our Planet, Our Health program has supported research on planetary health, which spans the intersection of human activity, environmental change, and human health. Pioneering transdisciplinary approaches has been a major priority for us, and the Our Planet, Our Health approach has inspired new funding programs like the UK Prevention Research Partnership, which is a major multi-funder initiative to improve population health and reduce inequalities through primary care prevention. Our grantees within the OPO program span a range of transdisciplinary modes or ways of working. Some of them engage directly with city governments or national governments, helping decision makers assess challenges, identify opportunities, and even source development funding for transformative action towards sustainability and health. Others directly involve communities in the co-design of complex interventions, for example, for sanitation, flood management, or safety. Still others leverage the power of NGOs and city networks like C40 Cities to bring effective science advice to decision makers. The common thread running through these and the other projects that we fund is the idea that science and society have to work together to effectively tackle complex challenges. We've seen this more than ever during the COVID pandemic, of course. Societies where science was framed as a trusted partner have been able to take more informed action and have performed much better. In my brief reflection for this meeting, I highlighted 4 reasons why transdisciplinary approaches produce better outcomes: more comprehensive information, greater ownership of solutions among decision makers and end users, higher long-term efficiency, and the establishment of long-term relationships between researchers, decision makers, and other important stakeholders. Collectively, we have to build awareness of these assets, of these benefits of transdisciplinarity, and ensure that it underpins our search for solutions to the difficult challenges that we face. Wellcome is launching a new strategy in which it will focus on 3 of the most important health challenges facing humanity: infectious disease, mental health, and importantly, climate change and health. Supporting transdisciplinary research will continue to be an important part of this work, as will partnership with key organizations like INGSA and the other organizations represented here. So thanks, Teresa.
Yeah, thank you very much. And there is a first question from the audience. It's about the definition of transdisciplinarity and if there is an agreed definition of transdisciplinarity. Do you think that we agree on one definition on this panel or not, from what you heard so far? Who would like to answer? No one? Or Naki, yeah? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you an ad hoc response. Transdisciplinarity and I think interdisciplinarity are kind of synonyms in my view. They designate scientific research projects where people from different disciplines are involved, but I think today also not just different disciplines. This is probably today not sufficient. We also should include citizen science, some stakeholder groups. So it's an inclusive type of process where I think evidence-based information stands in the foreground. And I would say the biggest challenge is, of course, choosing the common language and communication with people from different backgrounds.
Thank you. And I see that the other agree on this ad hoc information. I can say that the TDNet is working on that, and we say that it depends a little bit on the questions you have to deal with. So the question if you have participation or not in your research and how you deal with your stakeholders, where you are integrating them, that depends on the questions you have to answer. And so this disagreement on transdisciplinarity on the definition side can be solved by looking at the goals you would like to reach. So more information on the TDNet website. We will come now to the core of our discussion, and we need to reflect a little bit on the current situation. There's a strong claim for more transdisciplinarity in research policy advice, as we heard also from these different perspectives of the panelists. So please tell us what change process towards transdisciplinarity are already underway in your environment and your ecosystem, and how do this influence the outcomes of the programs, the institutions, or the policy advice you are giving? Perhaps now Naki could start with an answer.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, let me just respond to what you said before. I fully agree that it depends on the problem and the perspective what transdisciplinarity really means. And, you know, I believe I had almost 5 decades of experience in different projects at IASA. For example, the first 5 IPCC assessment reports. I also had the pleasure of being on the Millennium Ecosystem, Global Energy Assessment, and so on. But I would like to highlight the Global Commons Alliance that actually Naoko, she was humble. She didn't say she was the key person in actually having established that's very important transdisciplinary multi-stakeholder activity. And my most recent work is, of course, in the group of the chief advisors on the opinion on energy. So let me respond by saying that I actually don't think that there is really a lack of transdisciplinary scientific approaches. I think the problem is somewhere else, is that it is not an established practice in education organizations, in funding structures, or academic awards. And I think that's also quite important. I think another important challenge that I would like to highlight is that evidence-based transdisciplinary studies take time, and policy usually needs immediate advice. I mean, COVID-19 pandemic has vividly illustrated that. So the question is, how shall we deal with this paradox that one could call a paradox, the need for immediate scientific advice in cases of pandemics, but not just pandemics, other challenges, and the time that it takes to assess, evaluate, and synthesize scientific advice through transdisciplinary processes. So I find that that's a one of the major challenges facing us, and I would like to give back to you, Therese. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Jose.
Yeah, so I do think that we are seeing a surge in transdisciplinary research approaches, and that's driven mostly by an increasing recognition of complexity and sort of contextual awareness. So in the field of health, there was a shift over the last half century from international health, which focused on Southern problems, but from a Northern perspective, then to global health, which recognized shared problems, and eventually to planetary health, which is much more integrated. And on the policy side, you see the mirror to that progression in the transition from sort of disconnected bilateralism to the first global development framework in the MDGs and the SDGs now, which are much more integrated and cover a wide range of issues. And at the same time, there's been a general movement towards inclusivity and participation and governance and development action. And so all of that favors a focus on transdisciplinarity. So I think it's gone from more of a niche academic pursuit, something that's recognized as critical, not just by researchers, but by important global players like the OECD and the World Bank and many others. As Naki says, there's lots of groups doing transdisciplinary work. I do think there are some things that hold back a wider adoption of transdisciplinary methods. And I would come back to this terminological issue. I think there is actually substantial confusion in the world over what we mean by transdisciplinarity. And I also think that there's the danger of it becoming a buzzword in some sense that decision makers use to seem current, but without practical application. So I do think we do need to do a better job of defining and socializing the terminology. The second and maybe more important factor is just the pervasive focus on short-term efficiency, which COVID has shown up in so many ways. And this exists in science just as it does in the rest of society. So as Naki pointed out, the transdisciplinary research projects take longer to set up and produce results. They require specialized mechanisms for funding, review, monitoring, and evaluation. And so this work tends to get deprioritized by funders, even though it's more efficient and effective in the long run. So we really need a change in collective mindset to take the long view, and it's really up to all of us to make that happen.
Yeah, thank you. Naoko, would you like to step in?
Yeah, why not? Well, I moved last year from practitioner's world, where I lived almost 30 years, to this academic world. I'm quite surprised, to be very honest, that there is a huge, actually, lack of incentive to go the interdisciplinary world. And then I wonder this is mostly because that the university in Japan are lagging behind, or it's more like a general tendency that actually in academic world, still the incentive structure or the recognition structure still it's a kind of very much a silo business. I really don't know, but then I found it's a significant barriers for that the researchers and academic people actually move around to go for the interdisciplinary the way much more freely. But the one ongoing process which try to challenge that process is actually the call for the, in case of Japan, prime ministers call for that we need to achieve the net zero carbon and carbon neutral by 2050, and it really put a lot of kind of the bomb, time bomb to the entire process. And now that the academia, the business and others really need to work out that how we can really achieve the net zero by 2050 and how we can really change the system, our economic system, it's the energy system, food system, the city system, to get that towards much more circular the system. So this is a big kind of bombshell, and it's kind of impetus and to go beyond the traditional silo and look for the interdisciplinary process. And still, I see that quite a challenge internally in the academic world, but also in the broader the business world and the government world. There is still a lack of trust or confidence between the academic advice versus how they can translate or believe and translate into the actual decision on the ground. So this lack of trust that my distrust, the lack of confidence is something we need to continue to work on, and the policy or political clarity leadership that this is the way we should go together seems extremely important. Thank you, Teres.
Thank you very much. And Anna, how is it in your ecosystem?
Okay, my ecosystem, IPBES. So, well, IPBES, from its main foundation, it is transdisciplinary platform, which provides the widest information on biodiversity and nature contributions to people based on science and other solid knowledge. To be able to give the best available and reliable information to decision makers, well, of course, it is totally necessary to see the wider picture from different angles. So as we have to work from different disciplines, also we face challenges every day. And this includes, for example, difficulties from scientists, knowledge holders, and practitioners to understand each other. Also to recognize and value the different information coming from sources that are not necessarily peer-reviewed or published in scientific articles, but also the difficulties to reach criteria to establish the level of confidence of the information that has to be used in our assessments. Also, it is a challenge to decide what kind of messages are more relevant or more important, and how to transmit those messages to decision makers. All of those challenges are because, of course, the different perspectives make that different priorities are on the table. There are huge gaps in the respectful dialogue that must exist between different sciences, between the different branches of science, you know, the social, the natural, the physical, economic, and political sciences, but also between that sciences and between the other forms of knowledge and practices such as ILK and citizen science that already once was mentioned, and between all the above knowledge sources and the practice of those who make decisions. That is the challenge for a real transdisciplinarity that goes beyond the theory or beyond a concept. The lack of dialogue and inclusion needs to be addressed to learn how to incorporate the different knowledge systems for a transdisciplinarity in the message that goes and to the decision makers.
Yeah, thank you very much. We had a question from the audience concerning the funding mechanisms. And Jose, I think you are the closest guy to these kind of questions. And you mentioned also the OECD report on transdisciplinarity. Perhaps you can read the question and answer, or start answering, and the other can step in if they want to.
Sure.
Thank you.
So the question is, what kinds of funding mechanisms or support systems are needed for transdisciplinary research? Is it something that can only be robustly pursued in special institutions like IASA and the Wellcome Trust, or can academics also be successfully incentivized to do this kind of research? And I think the answer is certainly academics can be incentivized to do this kind of research. That's a lot of what we think about in our funding program. The OECD report, I think, is really interesting because it lists specific recommendations for different types or categories of stakeholders to support transdisciplinary research. And so, for example, universities need to develop structures and mechanisms to support cooperation across disciplines and outside of the university. And challenge-based approaches to research can be useful for that. Research funders need to develop mechanisms to allow for exploration, but also the development of rigor in transdisciplinary research. And then they need to provide long-term funding, not just short projects, but long-term funding, flexible support, recognizing that goals and transdisciplinary projects evolve. Governments need to set aside dedicated resources for transdisciplinary research. They need to support the engagement of public sector actors and the use of public data. And you could go on and on, but I would urge or viewers to take a look at the OECD report, because it's really interesting in providing those kinds of recommendations.
Yeah, thank you very much. But I think that funders have to rethink a little bit the the assessments of projects, and perhaps the panelists can say a little bit, a word of the difficulties to get some extra money for these processes and the learning, the mutual learning processes in transdisciplinary endeavors. Who would like to say a word about the funding, successful or less successful funding approaches? Yeah, Naoko, please.
Yeah, based on my very short period of 1 year, that I'm more successful in sourcing money or raising funds from business community or outside the university process. University process is still very much rigid. It's still very much institutionalized, established system. It's almost impossible, particularly for a newcomer like me, to find out now where to go. So that I'm kind of, I'm going for the new needs or the new demands and coming from outside the established system. And actually, that there are a lot of demands from those outside the world, from either business or the consumers and the investors, actually the citizens. So it seems that the new source of the demand, which is actually that the pursuing this transdisciplinary world. Thanks.
Thank you. Someone else would like to say a few words? Yeah, Jose?
Yeah, I would just agree with you that research funding institutions need to completely reconceptualize peer review, granting criteria, and evaluation processes. But it's not as easy as it sounds, and it's something that we think about all the time.
Yeah, and I could add that it's not only an issue for the academics, it's also an issue for the stakeholders, because they as well need some resources to engage in these kind of projects, and they have also to be aware of that they can bring themselves into a research process, and that it's not evident to do so from now on. And to formulate some questions and to say that what would be necessary to have now from the researcher side is not so easy as well. Due to the time, yeah, Naki, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick comment to add. I agreed with what was said. I would just like to add that we said before that transdisciplinary research takes quite a lot of time and effort, and therefore I think also funding has to be commensurate for that. It needs to have some kind of a radar function that we fund in advance the next generation of problems rather than wait until problems hit us. I think that's easier said than done, but I just wanted to make that point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So some more questions or comments from the audience are very welcome. And we have now the time to already coming a little bit to an end or conclusion of our discussion. And I would like to make an outlook with our panelists. So if transdisciplinarity is to be given a chance to demonstrate that it offers a good approach in times of crisis, how can we improve the situation? What do we can do ourselves to change the situation, or to whom do we have to address our votes to get something changed towards more transdisciplinarity in research and in this interface between research and the society? Perhaps Naoko, you can start giving your thoughts.
Sure. Because of the crisis, not despite of the crisis, but because of the crisis, there is more demand for this interdisciplinary the principle within the academia, but also the working with the government and people, the business. And as I mentioned, I see more demands from actually that the outside established world, like citizens, consumers, investors, that they are looking for a kind of, where in fact, we should really go towards a sustainable future. And this really requires that the system change, integrated system change. So, and they need a kind of answer. They are not, they are kind of impatient, not because, as Naki said, that they do understand that it takes time, but in terms of demand and in terms of the urgency, I think that it's really a good sign that we need a kind of plan, the vision for next 10 years, and because we have only 10 years left to change the course. So I have a lot of hope that because of the crisis, not despite of the crisis. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Naki.
Yes, I would like to argue that the more uncertain the challenges that humanity is facing, like the pandemic or climate change and so on, the more uncertain it is, the more we need science advice. So in some sense, I would say we need to focus on what people call known unknowns and initiate assessments before the specific problem occurs. And I think we need to close this disconnect between the fact that science assessments are complex and take a long time, and that advice is needed immediately. So what could be the answer on the way forward? I think perhaps two tracks. One track would be to design advice to respond to acute crisis. So I think that would be a different mode. It would be not deep evidence gathering, but it would be more at the level of the expertise and transdisciplinary insight. And then the second track would be, in my view, advice that takes a long term and tries to take a precautionary principle and looks forward what would be the next generational problems. And let me, since this is a conclusion, I would like to quote Gary Brewer, who addressed some of these important disconnects. And he said that world has problems, universities have departments, and that's the problem I think we are facing in transdisciplinary science. So we need to, I think, have transdisciplinary approaches rather than disciplinary silos. And that should be the advice of choice for the future. And I think, let me just, the final comment, it was mentioned before, the crucial element of that is to develop a common language. I think that's a big challenge, and Naoko said trust. I can only undersign that. Common language and trust and inclusiveness are the key components in my view.
Thank you very much. Anna, do you want to continue?
Yes, of course. Well, for me, scientific knowledge can lead great changes for a better future, especially in these times of crisis. But the way in which networks, dialogues, and communications are generated makes all the difference. A transdisciplinary approach, as was said by Naki, is not only important, but totally necessary to send comprehensive messages for decision makers. I want to highlight again the respect for other systems, methodologies, and evidence of knowledge, the ability to understand other sources of data and analysis outside the disciplines of each expert. The projection towards a language that indicates the scenarios relevant to political decision-making are the basis to find the transdisciplinarity we want. So a suggestion, for example, to start, the role of a transdisciplinary education programs at the universities is crucial, you already mentioned, as well as the promotion of research and publications gathering different approaches and knowledge systems. We have to embrace transdisciplinarity as a new way to produce science. Thank you.
Perhaps you could already add the question that we got about dissemination of knowledge generated by transdisciplinary research. I think this would fit very well into your last sentence. It's not only about production, but also how you get this knowledge.
Yes, how we communicate. That's right. I don't know. I don't know the question specifically, but it's just that we produce science from different perspectives, and we have a language coming from our science, our branch of science. And we think that how to disseminate knowledge generation, disciplinarity research. And we think that everybody understands what we say, but it's not right. It's not true. No, we have to see that who is the people that is reading us, that is expecting our research, that is expecting our outcomes, and who is the people that is going to use the information, the data, the analysis that we are producing. And the people who does that, generally decision makers, we hope decision makers, not only wants to address one question that comes from one branch of science. They want to address the problems of the whole society, problems of poverty, problems of hunger, problems, health problems, and a lot of problems that the society has. So the transdisciplinarity in the message that we give to the decision makers are, well, it is the basis to give a good a good message. Nevertheless, we do not know how to communicate because we are not policymakers, and we play to try to be policymakers. So let's work with the policymakers in building the communications, in building the ideas, and to produce the booklets that we are going to use in programs. That's the idea. Work with the politicians, work with the lawyers, work with the people that build the policy making and the institutionality.
Thank you very much, Jose. You can perhaps, in your closing words, say something about how this dissemination of the transdisciplinary knowledge could be.
Yeah, well, I agree with so much of what the other speakers have said about the opportunity in crisis, about the importance of trust, about the importance of genuine engagement with policymakers. I would highlight three things that we really need to do. And first, I've said this sort of already, but transdisciplinary science cannot be effectively managed and grown through existing scientific structures because they're focused on disciplinary advancement and concerns. So you can't take this old system and expect it to produce new outputs. We need a new system. And that means new dedicated mechanisms for research funding, publication, evaluation, and career progression that support transdisciplinary research. But that's only one half of the story. So we just as urgently need financial and strategic support for non-science participants in transdisciplinary science. And that probably means partnership with government, among others. That includes both support for public actors and other stakeholders to participate in this kind of science, but also mechanisms to give those kinds of stakeholders leverage over co-creation and the target setting within those processes. And all of that is on the supply side. Really importantly, we need to amplify the demand for transdisciplinary science from decision makers. And that requires both clarifying the terminology, making it clear just what's involved and what they can expect to get from transdisciplinary science, but also documenting success stories and getting it to them. It also involves creating long-term relationships between researchers and decision makers, which is one area where I think INGSA and other organizations like it can play a major role. And on the topic of dissemination, I think that's the key. I mean, if there's not the demand for this kind of knowledge, then it's going to be quite hard to disseminate it in effective ways. So it's a question of building those relationships, of building expectations, and then of delivering through new systems and new structures. And I hope that we're on the way towards all of that. Thanks.
So thank you very much. And I think we are already coming to an end of this very nice session. And I think we gained a lot of insights from a wide range of perspectives. So highlighting options for action is important, and we are still convinced that TD can help the global world population to shape a future worth living in and leaving no one really behind. We saw that the demand side also has to work on these ideas how transdisciplinary research projects can help them. I think we didn't say a word about language. It's not only to have a common language between the scientific people, but also with the politicians. So they are speaking French, German, Indian, a wide range of different languages. We have to deal also with this diversity, and I think we are just in a process, and the pandemic crisis helped us to understand a lot, that we have really to rethink a little bit our research and research society interfaces. So thank you very much for the panelists to have shared their insights and their ideas. And thank you very much to the organizers to have let us discussing with you. And thank you very much for the audience also to give some questions into the panel. I hope that we could answer some of these, give really the answers also the organizers wanted to have by having organized this nice session. Thank you very much. And I think it's also in the name of my panelists that I thank the organizers. And have a fruitful INGSA Congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for a very interesting discussion. We invite you to use the hashtag INGSA2021 on social media to share your experience and impressions of the conference. We really look forward to hearing from you. And join us after this short 15-minute break for the last plenary of the day.